towards the end of the year-long series of talks on the refuge tree. And you remember that over the last few weeks we've been talking about, well, first of all about Sangha and then about the Triratna Buddhist movement that Sangha founded, the Triratna Buddhist community that Sangha founded. And so we've had a whole series of talks. And tonight I'm going to talk about friendship and Sangha. And it just seems that that's particularly appropriate given that we've just had the 10th anniversary of the Sheffield Sangha being in this building. And actually I will say a little bit about that during my talk and finish off with a message from Sangha. So, yeah, first of all I want you to do a bit of thinking. I want you to think of some adjectives. So if I was to ask you to think of some words to describe the Sheffield Sangha or the atmosphere in this Buddhist centre, what might those words be? There is that, yeah. We're known for it. Unconventional, perhaps.
Warm.
Warm, okay.
Happy,
Happy, yeah.
Enthusiastic.
Sorry, I can only hear one at a time.
Enthusiastic.
Enthusiastic, yeah.
Friendly.
Joyful.
Friendly.
Yeah. Okay. All fairly positive. Okay. Yeah. So you can forget it now because I have got the sort of the tenor that I wanted. Actually, most people. Actually, I thought that someone might say peaceful or inspiring. Nobody said that. I thought that people would say warm, and I thought that someone would say friendly. So, well done, you did. You said what I thought. And actually, I mean, okay, we are from Sheffield, you know, so people are fairly friendly and warm and welcoming. But I don't think it's a coincidence that we just happen to have the friendliest, warmest, most welcoming people in Sheffield in this Buddhist centre. That's not just a coincidence. In a way, it is one of the distinctive qualities of the Triratna Buddhist community, that our Sanghas tend to be friendly, and they tend to be warm, and they tend to be welcoming. And certainly, it's one of the things that's noticed and commented on about the Triratna Buddhist community by other Buddhist groups. So other Buddhist groups say, the Triratna Buddhist community, they do Sangha really well. And then the other thing that they say about us is, Triratna Buddhist community, they know their Dharma. Okay, so two things that we're known for. And it's actually, this emphasis on Sangha is one of the things that Sangha decided was integral to a truly Buddhist movement. Friendship and Sangha, he thought, were really, really important. And that's partly because of his own experience. Early on in his career as a Buddhist, I think that he experienced quite a lack of friendship and Sangha from some of the Buddhists that he came into contact with. And then later on, when he was settled in Kalimpong, he formed a really strong connection with his own teachers. And so he had a really strong experience of friendship, a kind of vertical friendship really, with his own teachers who were kind of further on along the path. And he really enjoyed those relationships. And Sangha is, well, he's a great thinker and a great visionary. He read very widely and thought very deeply about Buddhism and about the Buddhist teachings. And he thought very deeply about modern society, the world as it is today, the way people are with each other. And one of his conclusions was that friendship and Sangha are absolutely fundamental to practicing Buddhism. And that most spiritual practitioners in any spiritual tradition are not going to get very far without them. One of the other things he noticed is that the idea of Sangha, the ideal of Sangha, had got a bit narrow in a lot of the Buddhist world since the days of the Buddha. And especially perhaps in the Theravada tradition of Southeast Asia that claims to follow the discipline established by the Buddha. So when Sangha founded a new Buddhist movement, he introduced two features which raised a lot of eyebrows elsewhere in the Buddhist world, but which really were going back to very basic Buddhism. They were really based on the principles established by the Buddha. The first one was that commitment was primary and lifestyle was secondary. So in the Theravadan tradition, in Theravadan Buddhism, the Sangha is not all practicing Buddhas. The Sangha is the monks. The Sangha is the ordained monks. And while the rest of Buddhists are kind of second-class Buddhists in a way, their main function is to support the monks to practice. So they're expected to be generous, and a lot of them will be practicing ethics and practicing generosity. But there's a definite hierarchy there. And there's also a very clear hierarchy between men and women. So there is a superiority of monks. Superiority of monks is assumed. So even a novice monk is kind of more important than, has higher status than a very experienced Buddhist nun, for instance, or a layperson who has been practicing very, very sincerely for many years. But from the Pali Canon, actually, we can see that in the days of the Buddha recognises 4 divisions of his followers. And the 4 divisions were wanderers, not monks actually, but wanderers, people who were wandering around following the Buddha and practicing very hard, devoting their complete lives to their practice. So there were wanderers and there were male and female wanderers, so those are 2 divisions of the Sangha. And there were lay people, both male and female. And the Buddha quite clearly recognised all 4 of those divisions as being sincere practitioners. There wasn't a hierarchy in his mind. He thought that actually, he seems to imply that wanderers have probably got better conditions for practicing because they can really devote themselves to their practice. But he doesn't distinguish a hierarchy in other ways. And it's quite clear that the Buddha recognised that some of his lay followers had become enlightened. They did become enlightened in the same way as many of the wanderers that were part of his more immediate community did. So in the Triratna Buddhist community, the Sangha is something different. The Sangha is all of those who commit to following the path of the Buddha. Okay, so all committed Buddhists are part of the Sangha. So commitment is primary. And a Triratna Buddhist who has a job and a family can still commit just as fully to the Buddhist path, and they can practice just as fully within the conditions that they find themselves in as, say, someone who's living at a retreat centre. They can still become a mitra, they can still train for ordination, they can still become ordained. And of course the other revolutionary thing is that men and women in the Triratna Buddhist community are ordained on the same terms. You become mitras on the same terms, we're ordained on the same terms. So men and women order members are completely equal. And that is very shocking for a lot of the Buddhist world. And apparently there were lots of raised eyebrows on the occasions when we've had gatherings of Triratna order members at Bodh Gaya, the place that they site of the Buddha's enlightenment, when a woman leads a puja. In fact, even better is when a woman from one of the untouchable communities in India leads a puja at Bodh Gaya, because that really challenges local preconceptions about status. So that was one of the very radical things that Sangharatchara introduced in the Triratna Buddhist community. The other, perhaps less controversial, but the emphasis is unusual, was an emphasis on friendship and the importance of friendship, the central importance of friendship. As far as Sangharatchara is concerned, we can't go it alone. In stressing that, actually, he's really going back to some of the emphases of the Buddha. In the Buddha's time, he advised Ananda, in words that you've heard quoted again and again, that spiritual friendship is the whole of the spiritual life, not just half of it, as Ananda had said. He advised Meggia that when the heart's release is immature, in other words, when we're not enlightened, the thing that's needed is not the perfect place to meditate, but it's spiritual friendship. The Buddha also praised the Anuruddhas, who were a small group of friends who were living and practicing together. And he praised them because they were living together so harmoniously, and they were really looking after each other's physical and spiritual needs. They were really thinking about what other people wanted, and living together in great harmony. And there are lots and lots of other examples in the Pali Canon of the Buddha just underlining the importance again and again of friendship. And the fact is that we do need the support of others if we're going to achieve anything very much, and certainly if we're going to tackle something as challenging as changing ourselves in our own deeply ingrained habits. And even in the more mundane world of self-development, people see their therapists or counsellors on a regular basis because, well, somehow it's not enough to think, I need to change, and this is how I'm going to change. Kind of deciding that we're going to do something isn't enough. We just need plenty of support. We need to talk to people about what we're trying to achieve and then tell them how we're doing. And we need people to remind us and encourage us. So we're not going to do much without the support of others. And as Vedanya, I forgot his name for a minute. In a lot of Buddhist traditions, there's a huge emphasis on meditation and on insight. There's a sort of unwritten expectation somehow that we can individually meditate our way to enlightenment. And of course that appeals to many of us, it appeals to lots of people in the West, because we tend to value thinking and we tend to value individual effort and individual kind of accomplishment, I suppose, more than we value feeling and more than we value collective endeavour. But as the Buddha said to Meggia, when the heart's release is immature, what we need is the support of friends. So, a bit about friendship in the Triratna Buddhist community. And I was going to start by talking about friendship, but there's a sense in which you all know what friendship is. Most of us have experienced friendship. Most of us will have lots of friends. But the Triratna Buddhist community does say one or two quite challenging things about friendship. So I'm going to say some of the challenging things. And the first one is that nowadays it is assumed that most people will get most of their emotional support from their sexual relationships, from their family relationships. And the Sangha and the Triratna Buddhist community are quite challenging about that, because their take on it is that friendship with other people who are practicing is as important, and in many cases far more important, than our family relationships and than our main sexual relationships. And a lot of people find that quite challenging. Certainly, there are many married people who are ordained, but actually they are expected to have very strong and very deep friendships in the Sangha, regardless of whether or not their partner is in the Sangha. And indeed, it's unlikely that anyone is going to get very close to ordination without having those strong and deep friendships, that network of friendships in the Sangha. It's not enough to have a really good relationship with your sexual partner, with your husband or wife. It's regarded as completely necessary to your spiritual development that you'll have friends as well. And actually, that does make sense to me, because I observe from my own family and other friends that family relationships, they can get quite tight, they can get quite isolated. I know people who have very good relationships with their own partners and with their own families. But actually, if that's their main emotional support, it can be putting an awful lot of stress on one other person or one or two other people. And I observe actually that quite often those people who are in those sorts of rather tight, hermetically sealed family relationships will hark back wistfully to their younger days when they had a whole circle of friends. And they'll kind of look back at that and think, well, wasn't it great when I had all of those friends? What's happened to me? You know, that I've got really isolated. And my experience is, or my observation is, that when I see people, when I see a family surrounded by a whole network of friendships and different relationships, it will take a lot of strength, a lot of the stress off that kind of husband-wife relationship, and actually will strengthen the individuals and often make the marriage much easier, much less tense than it is in a very nuclear, isolated family. So that's the first challenging thing. Second challenging thing is that, well, friends are people who communicate, and there's a real stress on real communication in the Triratna Buddhist community. And communication, where communication is defined as a common exploration of the spiritual world by people who are completely honest and in full harmony with one another. So it's quite challenging, actually. It's easy to say, but it is quite challenging. To be completely honest and in full harmony with another person involves quite a lot of self-disclosure. It involves actually revealing quite a lot about yourself to other people. And of course, that has the huge benefit of, well, there's a huge amount of warmth and trust that come from people kind of disclosing themselves, revealing themselves, especially revealing themselves warts and all to other people. And strangely enough, my experience has been that when I have had someone tell me something about themselves that they're a bit ashamed of or that they've been keeping secret for some time, what I mainly feel about them is admiration, because there's a real courage that's needed to reveal yourself, warts and all. And so my experience of that kind of self-revelation is that it breeds trust, it breeds respect, and it breeds great warmth. Okay, another challenging thing about friendship in our community is that, although there are lots of exceptions to this, most meaningful friendships are likely to happen with people of the same sex. And, it's controversial because people always want to talk about it, and they always want to ask, well, why do we have women's groups and men's groups? What's it all about? Well, I think it's because we are most likely to understand and to empathise with and to be able to communicate and understand people of the same sex than we are people of the opposite sex. It's a huge generalisation, but in my experience, it's more often true than not. There are less likely to be complications like sexual attraction and projections. And it's more likely that we're going to be able to just be ourselves. So, single-sex principle, one of the very challenging things about friendship in the Triratna Buddhist community. And the final thing is that friendship isn't something passive. It isn't something that happens by chance, and it isn't something that we kind of have a right to. Sangha said that if you want a friend, then you need to be a friend. That you don't just wait for friendship to come along. Friendship isn't something we just experience and enjoy. It's something that we do. It's something active. It's something where it's something that we have to take the initiative with. We have to make an effort with it. And actually, Sangha is in good company here. Aristotle also said that friendship seems to consist more in loving than in being loved. And certainly it's my own experience that my own best friendships are the ones where I've put in quite a lot of effort, where I've had to, either put in time or overcome obstacles to kind of make friends. And interestingly, I think because of that, Sangha has very controversially said that it's possible to be friends with anyone. And I say that's controversial because when I say it, people always say, well, there are people that I couldn't be friends with. What about Hitler? What about mass murderers? What about... And actually, I think that Sangha is making the point that actually, because friendship is something that you do, it is possible to be friendly with. It is possible to see the human being in even someone who we might disapprove of quite strongly. It's possible to see the human being, to see the reasons why they are as they are, and it's possible to behave towards them with warmth and respect. It's possible to act in their best interests. And if we're doing that, then we're being friendly towards them. I think as well that there's a kind of spectrum of friendship. There's a kind of spectrum that starts at one end with just behaving in a friendly way towards people. So, you know, we can be friendly to almost anyone we meet in the course of our day. And then at the other end of the spectrum is having a deep and trusting and completely open relationship, friendship with someone. And, all right, two ends of a spectrum, but they're all degrees of friendship. And so if we think of friendship in that way, I think it is possible to be friends with anyone. So, yeah, that made me think about my own network of friendships. And actually, when I thought of my own network of friendships, a piece of music came to mind. The piece of music is a piece by Elgar called Enigma Variations. I don't know whether anyone's come across it. I expect some of you have. Okay. So Enigma Variations by Elgar are 15 short pieces of music, and each one is a kind of portrait or a kind of rejoicing in one of his friends. And I really like this piece of music because each of the 15 pieces is very sympathetic, but they're all very different. And they partly express the people that Elgar is friends with, and they partly express his feelings towards them. And there is something about friendship that kind of makes me, there's something about my network of friends that kind of makes me feel the same way. I feel as if I have a huge variety of friends. I have a lot of people that I like, that I'm fond of for very different reasons, and they're very different people. If I was a composer, I'd compose different pieces of music for them. And in Elgar's Enigma Variations, okay, so the mood of each piece of music is quite different. So he brings out different interests, different talents of his friends. He brings out the quirks. He almost teases some of the people with the piece of music dedicated to them. And there's real affection and love in some of the portraits. But I think most of all, the one that was written not for his wife, that's the first one, but there's a wonderful melody that he wrote for his best friend called Augustus Jaeger. The piece, if you know the piece of music, is Nimrod. So, yeah, in a way, Enigma Variations kind of sums up how I feel about my own network of friends. And my observation is that it is a bit of a network, that, at the outer fringes of my network are a whole lot of people at the Buddhist Centre and elsewhere with whom I have made a connection in some way. So there might be people that I have just sat down and had a good conversation with, and we've revealed a bit of ourselves, and we've kind of connected. But they're not ongoing friendships, you know. They're just little jewels that kind of pop up from time to time, and they're in kind of the outer fringes of my network of friendship. And then somewhere around the middle, somewhere around somewhere between the centre and the outer fringes, are a whole lot of people whom I've got to know over time. And actually, into this category I put most of the women who've been in my Mitra study groups. Okay, so in a Mitra group, well, you get to know each other quite well, actually. You do a lot of reporting in, you meet every week, week in, week out, often for several years. All sorts of things happen in people's lives that we share in the Mitra group. We study together, and in studying together, we're kind of delving around, trying to get at the truth. We're exploring things that are really important to us. And actually, we make quite strong connections. And some of those connections that I've made in Mitra groups have kind of carried on and got deeper. And some of the women who've been in my Mitra groups, well, they're not in Sheffield any longer. They've kind of gone off somewhere else. And I still have an affection and a affection for them and a friendship with them. And maybe I'll pick up those friendships at some later point. And then at the centre of my network, I've got a smaller number of people that, in a way, I can be completely open with, completely myself with. So they're people who I can trust with my ethical failings, with my samskaras, people that I can make confession to, and they would include the members of my chapter, Moksha Lila and Punyamala, Kemasuri, Vidya Lila, and Siyapada, and my colleagues on the centre team, so Maitradasa, Bodhinaga, Satyajyoti, and Vidanya. So yeah, I do think that there's a real network of friendship, and actually I do think of it as being a kind of net. I can kind of imagine it as a net. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Before I do, just a couple of other emphases about friendship. When Sangha talks about friendship, he is keen to talk about the spiritual element of friendship. And there's a sense in which there are a lot of common features between a really good friendship that we have with anyone, really, and a friendship that we have in the Sangha. But there's probably one difference. So with a lot of really good friends, there'll be appreciation and liking, just a kind of response to another person that we kind of can communicate with and that we like. There'll probably be an enjoyment of shared interests, and certainly a lot of my friends who are not Buddhists are people that I'm friends with because they like walking, for instance. They like doing the same things that I do. They like the outdoors. And of course, the same thing applies within the Sangha. We go on Sangha walks together, we go and do things together. I have friends because we've been partners in a common enterprise. So some of the friendships that I've made at work have been like that. And actually, some of the best friendships I have within the Sangha have been on the basis of a common enterprise. So there's a real network of friendships between the gardening team, for instance. Emma's here tonight, but there's a few of us who meet every week, and we just do the garden together. Sorry, Charlie's one of them too. Well, that's the basis for a real, we've got a real shared enterprise. Over the years, we're making a difference to the garden at the Buddhist Centre. Communication is another one. And I think the thing that's different in spiritual friendships is that in a spiritual friendship there have to be shared values and shared vision. So in a way that's the difference between friends that you might have outside and friends that you have at the Buddhist Centre. Not always, because quite often your friends outside will have the kind of spiritual vision. It might not be quite the same as yours if they're not a Buddhist. But I have a friend who's a Quaker, for instance, who does actually see the world in spiritual terms, and I can kind of share that with her, even though her vision and her framework are not quite the same as mine. But what I have in common with all of you, actually, and what makes it, in a way, possible to be friends with any of you, is that we do have a shared vision and shared values, a shared ethical code. And then, one final sort of emphasis about friendship in Triratna is the concept that there is both horizontal and vertical friendship. And actually, what I've been talking about so far is, I think probably most of you have assumed is horizontal friendship. It's kind of friendship with people who are more or less at the same level as us. And actually, most of us have quite a wide network of those sorts of friends. But there is also an emphasis, and actually traditionally is in Buddhism, on vertical friendship, on friendship with someone who's a bit further along the path than us. And that certainly was regarded as very important by the Buddha. The Buddha had quite a lot of friends who regarded him as a kalyana mitra. a noble friend, a friend who's further along the path. Certainly Ananda would have done, and a lot of his other well-known disciples. They had a real friendship with the Buddha. It was a real close friendship, but it was obviously a vertical friendship. He was further on than they were. And actually, those sort of relationships you will find all over the Buddhist world. So, the relationship of a novice with the teacher, or of a disciple with a guru. And actually, I think that these days we often tend to think of gurus as being someone fairly remote that you only see from time to time. But actually, in most original Buddhist traditions, there was quite a close relationship between a guru and his disciple. They would know each other quite well, and the disciple would get to know his guru, his teacher, kind of warts and all. He would know his quirks and his failings, as well as see what his Kalyana Mitra, what his spiritual friend represented, that he was further along the path, and that he was able to see more clearly than him what was going on and where they were both going. And the Buddha said of Kalyana Mitrata, of this kind of vertical friendship, that it's the forerunner of the Noble Eightfold Path and the 7 factors of enlightenment, just as the dawn signals the rising of the sun. So the Buddha talked quite a lot about this kind of vertical friendship. And in the Triratna Buddhist community, Kalyana Mitrata, having a Kalyana Mitra, a friend further along the path, is often formalised in a Kalyana Mitra ceremony, when either an order member or someone who's in training for ordination takes 2 experienced order members as their Kalyana Mitras, people who will kind of help them and support them in their practice. So, a couple of examples that you'll know. Maitri Dasa has Vidanya and Amogavamsa as his KMs, his Kalyana Mitras, and Kate has Vajratara and Mokshalila as her Kalyana Mitras. So they're sort of formalised Kalyana Mitra relationships. But not everyone has formal KMs. Though most people who are in training for ordination and most order members will have that kind of friendship with other order members. So I don't have any formal KMs, but there are probably 3 people with whom I have that kind of relationship, and certainly who supported me in the run-up to ordination and as a new order member. And actually Shantasiddhi was one, who was very encouraging with me when I was kind of approaching ordination. Punyamala, my preceptor, was another, and Siyanpada, who many of you will know, was the third. And I have very vivid memories of 2 conversations that I had on my ordination retreat. One was with Shantasiddhi, and the other was with Punyamala. And it was at a time on my ordination retreat when I was having some really severe doubts. I really wondered whether I was doing the right thing and whether I wanted to go through with my ordination. And I was amazed that they weren't shocked, that they were completely unfazed by this. And they seemed to regard me just expressing my doubts as part of the process of getting ordained. So I kind of expected that when I went to talk to them, they would ask me if I wanted to leave the retreat or something like that. So they didn't try to convince me of anything. They took my doubts seriously, but they somehow saw the bigger picture. And I think that's something that a Kalyana Mitra does. A Kalyana Mitra sees the bigger picture. They see what you're like, they see your strengths, they know what your failings are, and they have confidence in you. They can see the possibility in you. They can see that, they can see that you can do what you're aiming to do, and they'll kind of reflect that back to you when you most need it, which both Shantasiddhi and Punyamala did at my ordination retreat, and well, here I am. Kalyana Mitrata, very, very important in the Triratna movement. What is Sangha? I said the talk is on friendship and Sangha. So what is Sangha in Triratna terms? And what's the link with friendship? Well, in a way, I think very simply, Sangha is simply a network of friendships. But in a way, it's a kind of interlocking and overlapping network of friendships, because it's my network of friendships overlapping with Claire's and Terry's and Stephen's and Suryamati's. It's kind of all that network of friendship of all of us, all kind of interlocking and overlapping, and binding us together in something that together is much bigger than any one of us. In mythical terms, you could think of it as Indra's net. Some of you will have come across Indra's net. It's this wonderful, mythic, huge, vast, probably infinite net. And at each node in this net, there's this amazing jewel that kind of sparkles and that reflects every other jewel in this net. And in a way, the Sangha's network of friendships are a bit like that. We're kind of reflecting each other. We're reflecting reality in a way back to each other. We're reflecting our interconnectedness with each other back to each other. So, just thinking about the anniversary and because it's been our anniversary this weekend. This weekend we were 10 years in this building, 10 years since the opening of this building. And actually on Sunday in here we were looking back at not just the last 10 years, but in a way the last 20 years, and even a little bit more than that, from the very first Triratna people, it was then Western Buddhist Order members arriving in Sheffield. And actually, one of the quotes, one of the things that occurred to me was, when I was reading about Sangha, this particular quote that I'm going to read you from Sangha kind of made me think of the building of the Sheffield Sangha. He says, one measure, perhaps the best, of the spiritual vitality of a religious group or institution is the strength of spiritual friendships amongst its members. If they're connected to one another in a web of friendships, and if they attach a high value to those friendships, it augurs well for the survival of the true spiritual community. Equally auspicious would be signs that, as well as getting on well with each other, the members are friendly to people beyond their own charmed circle. Spiritual friendship is not exclusive and is always eager to make new friends. So, well, in a way, I think that was reflected on Sunday by our celebration of the growth of the Sheffield Sangha. Somewhere else, Sangha actually points out that, building Sangha can only grow at a certain rate because friendships can only form at a certain rate. You can't get a whole collection of people together really quickly and form a Sangha, because actually there's got to be friendship between those people. So, on Sunday we saw how the Sheffield Sangha grew very slowly to begin with. There were only a few people. It grew slowly and gradually, but gradually, bit by bit, it increased, and you could almost see the network of friendships forming. So, how do we grow friendships? How do we build Sangha? How do we build Sangha? I began to talk about it in my talk, when I was writing my talk. I began to talk about building Sangha, and I thought, Sangha isn't something that you build really. That kind of gives the wrong impression, because build kind of implies that you're kind of making something bigger. And actually building Sangha isn't just about getting more people involved in the Sangha. In a way it ought to be deepening Sangha, because building Sangha is really about strengthening our friendships and deepening our connections with each other. But anyway, there's a very traditional list of how Sangha is built, how Sangha is strengthened, perhaps. And so it's a traditional list. So, Vidanya actually mentioned it on Sunday at the anniversary event. It's a list called the 4 Samgraha Vastus. And they are, I'll give you them quickly and then I'll go through them more slowly. The first one is dana, or generosity. The second one is Triratna, or kindly speech. The third one is Arthacharya, or beneficial activity. And the fourth one is Samanarthata, which means equalization and can be interpreted in two different ways. And I think that one of the reasons that the Sheffield Sangha has grown so well, has grown so big, and has grown so kind of strong in a way, is that we're very. When I go through this list, you'll see that we do this quite well. We do it well. We can always do it better, but we've already got quite good at this. So dana, generosity. When I started to think about examples of generosity, they were endless. I could have written pages and pages and pages of them. And the first three that I wrote down were Peter baking the potatoes every Tuesday and putting out the chairs. Fantastic. It's an act of generosity. The second thing I wrote down was empty dana bowls. Okay. When you come into the Buddhist Centre, you see wooden bowls that are meant for donations. Usually on Sangha Night, they're empty. And that's because an awful lot of the people who come to Sangha Night, an awful lot of you, are giving us money regularly straight into our bank account so that you won't forget. And that's absolutely fantastic, because that lot of standing orders, together with the gift aid that we get back from the government, gives us over £30,000 a year and pays the support for the people who kind of work at the Buddhist Centre and helps to pay our bills. And that means a huge amount, as any of you who have been responsible for budgeting for an organisation will know. And the third one is an example of generosity that we celebrated on Sunday at the anniversary event. Those of you who came on Sunday might for the first time have met someone called Suryamati, who is an order member who came to Sheffield as chair in 1992 and was chair for, 8 or 9 years here. But during the 1990s, when the Sangha in Sheffield was very small, Suryamati, because the Sangha at that time was very, very short of money, decided that since money was needed, he would go and earn some money. And although he'd been working full-time as the chair of Glasgow Buddhist Centre before he came here, he dusted off his pharmacy skills and he went to work as a pharmacist in 1993 and continued to do that all through the 90s and until 2003. And most of the money that he earned as a pharmacist, he contributed one way and another to the Sangha. And at certain key points during the 1990s, like when we wanted to take out the lease on our very first premises, it was Suryamati who had the money to put down to be able to pay for the lease and the decoration of the premises. So there are some amazing acts of generosity that I could mention. We're a very generous Sangha. Then Triratna, kindly speech, which seems somehow less dramatic, but it kind of pervades the tenor and tone of conversations at the centre. We'll see it next week at the Mitra ceremonies when we hear people rejoicing in the new Mitras. And actually, I include in skillful speech and in kindly speech some of the skillful feedback that I have been given personally about my own tendencies. Because my experience is that when people are feeding back to me the things that I'm perhaps not so strong on, they do it very kindly and very skillfully. Arthacharya, beneficial activity, lots of individual acts of helpfulness and kindness, lots of volunteers helping out at the centre. And actually, I took as my example here the 30-odd people who helped to clean and repair and decorate this room before we had the new Rupa installed on Buddha Day this year. And then the smaller group of people who did the same thing, who did the same thing to this whole building when we moved into what was obviously a very damp and dark and decaying church and presbytery 10 years ago. And then the even smaller group that took on the much more modest premises that we had before this Buddhist Centre in Broom Hill. And they just did the work. People turned up, they painted, they repaired, they put together a Buddhist Centre for the benefit of others. And equalisation, Samanarthata. sometimes regarded as treating everyone equally, but it can also be it also be taken as being kind of exemplification. I think this is quite important because I think that each one of us, in a way, is exemplifying Buddhism to our own families, to our friends, to our colleagues at work. So in a way, we're taking out our practice into the world from this Buddhist centre. And I think that's really important. Okay, so, final bit about Sangha. Those of you who've heard about Sangha, heard people talk about Sangha in the past, might be a little bit puzzled that Sangha is sometimes taken to mean one thing and sometimes taken to mean something slightly different. So there's a distinction drawn between the Arya Sangha, the noble Sangha, which includes all enlightened beings of the past and present and future. So in the Theravada tradition, that would be everyone who's broken through to enlightenment, all humans who have become enlightened. In the Mahayana traditions, that would be even broader, and it would be taken to include the archetypal Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who kind of represent certain aspects of enlightenment as well. So that's the Arya Sangha, the enlightened Sangha. And then there's the mundane Sangha, which I think probably means most of us, but perhaps not. The network of friendships amongst the spiritually committed is how it's normally described. The network of friendships between those who are building Sangha and those who share the common vision. And actually, I quite like the ambiguity of the term. I quite like it that we use the term Sangha for both of those. Because I think that they do merge into each other. Certainly in the time of the Buddha, there was a kind of merging and overlapping of people who shared the vision with people who were actually enlightened. And maybe even now, because, who can judge the enlightenment status of another human being? Probably only an enlightened being. So how would we know if a few individuals in our Sangha were enlightened? Maybe lots of us are. Maybe everyone is apart from me. Okay, well maybe you and I are. The rest of them. But I like the ambiguity because I think that at any moment a mundane Sangha might become an Arya Sangha. And to be frank, I'm much more interested in that than I am in enlightenment for myself. I have to confess that I don't think there's that much chance that I'm either going to study or reflect or meditate my way to enlightenment. I know my limits and I know my own mind. Some of the time I know my own mind. And I'm only going to make it to enlightenment if I'm carried along by all of you. I put my trust in the Sangha, and I put my trust in the myth that I really love of the Sangha being a bodhisattva. When the Sangha is at its best, it's as if it is an enlightened being. Individually, we might be a bit puny, our practice might be a bit flawed. But put us together, and, well, all that life experience, all that energy, all that kind of wanting to go in the same direction. And actually, sometimes you can feel it. A lot of the time, we're a bit unintegrated, we're a bit kind of all over the place, we're pulling in different directions. But there are moments in pujas, there are moments when we're meditating together. Sometimes there are moments when we're together and we're talking about the Dharma, when something just happens, and it's a bit as if there's just a flash, there's just an inkling of something bigger than us, that we're kind of, we're of one mind. You can kind of see that vision sparkling. And, well, I like to think that those moments, they're like flashes of enlightenment. They're like flashes of the arising of the bodhicitta. And they may be momentary, but if we keep practicing together, if we keep building Sangha, then we're going to get better at it. And those moments, which for me are very precious, they conjure the archetypal figure of Avalokiteshvara, 1,000 arms reaching into families and workplaces all over South Yorkshire, North East Derbyshire, all the places that we come from, but united around a common aspiration, just as Avalokiteshvara's arms are united against his central pair of hands that hold the Chintamani, the wish-fulfilling jewel that's meant to represent the bodhicitta, the aspiration for enlightenment for all beings. So, well, how do we move towards making that image a reality? Well, we can do it by keeping on being friendly, keeping on communicating well and deeply, keeping our common purpose in mind, keeping on practicing the Samgraha Vastus, and just keeping on building Sangha. And yeah, I just want to finish with the message that Sangharachita sent us last Friday or Saturday to mark our 10th anniversary. And I read it out on Sunday, but I want to read it out again because of what he says about the Sheffield Sangha. So, I read the whole message then. Dear Suryamati, here is my message on the occasion of the Sheffield Buddhist Centre's 10th anniversary. 10 years ago, I cut the ribbon at the opening of the new Sheffield Buddhist Centre. Since then, the centre has been the venue of Dharma activities of every kind, from meditation to the celebrating of Buddhist festivals. With its friendliness and its clear and effective teaching of the Dharma, the Sheffield Buddhist Centre has gone from strength to strength, attracting more and more people from every walk of life, so that the centre is now at the heart of a growing Sangha of order members, mitras and friends. I therefore send you, the members of the Sheffield Buddhist Centre, my hearty congratulations on what your joint efforts have achieved over the years. It's my conviction that, in the second decade of its existence, the centre will continue to grow and be a source of inspiration to an increasing number of people. With much metta, Sangharachita. So, with its friendliness and its clear and effective teaching of the Dharma. That's what Sangharachita thinks about us, and it's what other people notice. So, friendliness at the heart of the Sangha and at the heart of building Sangha in Sheffield.